Good evening. This is Devi Ward, and you are listening to Sex is Medicine, your number one resource for holistic sex education. Thank you for tuning in on this and every Thursday evening at 7 p.m. Pacific, 10 p.m. Eastern. And you can catch the replay of this and every show anytime you want on tunein.com and iTunes Radio, or iTunes.com, iTunes podcast. And you can catch the live show, as I said, every Thursday evening on CTR Network and tunein.com. Just look up Sex is Medicine with Devi Ward. This evening, we have another wonderful and amazing show with another wonderful and amazing guest. And I usually open up every show with a question, but this entire show is answering a question that I get asked very, very frequently. And that question is, how do I talk to my kids, particularly my teenagers, about sex? So this evening, we have recruited an expert to help us answer that question, Dr. Tamara Griffin, who is a sexologist, sex therapist, educator, and motivational speaker with more than 20 years of experience speaking, writing, and teaching about sexuality. She travels the country helping individuals embrace and honor their sexuality. Oh, we love, love, love that. Dr. Tamara has published numerous books and articles, and she is the owner of LIFE Life by Dr. Tamara Griffin, Live, Inspired, Feel Empowered, LLC, LIFE Life. Dr. Tamara is also an editor-in-chief of Our Sexuality magazine, and Our Sexuality is a premier magazine for women's sexuality and sexual health. We love those two together, sexuality and sexual health. So thank you so much, Dr. Tamara.
Yes, thank you for having me. I'm very excited. As you probably can tell, this is a subject that I'm very passionate about. It's very near and dear to my heart, and I'm ready to just dive right on into it.
Wonderful. Okay, so as I said before, one of the primary questions that I get from usually couples that I work with and women that I work with is, how do I talk to my kids about sex? And what I usually say to them is, well, the more comfortable you are with your own sexuality, the easier it's going to be to talk to other people about your sexuality. And, we're role models for our children. So if they see you embracing your sexuality in healthy, positive ways, then they're going to learn how to do it because they take their cues from you. And, the more comfortable they feel around you, the more comfortable you feel about your sexuality, the more comfortable they're going to feel about you. So what is your input on that?
Absolutely. I think that's great what you state because, again, we have to own and embrace our own sexuality. Like you mentioned before, we can have that conversation with anyone, whether it's our partner, whether it's our physician, or whether it's our child. And I think that it's so important that parents become educated and informed and deal with their challenges when it comes to sexuality, because I firmly believe that children should be learning about sexuality from their parents. However, if the parent cannot, for whatever reason, provide accurate, informative, and developmentally appropriate information for their child, then they should seek outside resources such as a sex educator, a sexologist, a sex coach, a sex therapist, someone who has that information, has the ability to convey it in an accurate manner in a very developmentally appropriate way. But I think, again, there's several different ways that you can begin the conversation with your child. If you're comfortable doing it, you can use a television show. Sit down together and watch a television show and get your child's perspective on what they saw around the different challenges of the different issues related to sexuality on the show, because we know sex sells everything, right? It's all on TV, it's in commercials, it's in everything. So the television could actually be a very useful tool in terms of using it to talk to your child about sex. There's several books out there that you can use to talk to your child about sex, but you definitely have to be able to do it in a developmentally appropriate way, even beginning with puberty, because as your child is growing, their body is changing, and so they need to be able to understand what those changes are. Like, you don't want your child, especially your female daughter, to be 16 years old and she's never had a discussion about a menstrual cycle or a period. I mean, that could be very traumatic, for a young girl to all of a sudden just come on a period and she's never had the conversation about what's going on with her body. And also it just leads to to more confusion and chaos as they get older if they don't have a healthy understanding about sexuality in terms of, it can lead to unhealthy relationships. It can lead to an individual putting themselves at risk for sexually transmitted infections like HIV, gonorrhea, syphilis, and all of these other things. But then also, if I don't know the proper terminology, because that's so important that when we talk to our kids, we teach them the proper terminology. Say vagina, say breast, say menstrual cycle, say penis. And I mean, if you want to incorporate the slang term into the conversation after you've already given them the accurate terminology, that's fine, but make sure they have an understanding of that accurate terminology, because if they don't, that can actually become a barrier, right? So how do I go to a physician? Because most physicians don't know slang. So how do I go and talk to my physician about my body, right? And I don't have the proper terminology. There's going to be a disconnect, and the physician may not be able to treat me properly simply because I don't know the correct terminology. And in addition, when we slap all these slang terms on our body parts, and I'm sure that you know them, especially these young kids, they have so many different terminologies for one body part. But when we do that, we kind of devalue our body, right? And when we devalue our body, we're more likely to put it at risk. So it's so important that we use the correct terminology. We talk to our kids in a developmentally appropriate way. We use things that are popular to them, like I said, books, even some of the songs and even some TV shows that we see, because like a lot of these songs, again, they're laced with a lot of sexual innuendos, and our kids are singing them and they have no idea what they're talking about. Perfect example, Nicki Minaj's song, Truffle Butter. A lot of people don't realize what those words are actually, what they mean. So you have to start having those conversations. And I would say, as early as 5 or 6 years old, when the kids are starting to be exposed to the outside world, when they're going to school, they're being exposed at daycare, to other people's kids who may not have a sense of sexuality or a healthy sexuality. So you have to start the conversation. And you can't be afraid to have the conversation.
That beautiful, because that's exactly what I was going to ask. So when do we start? Because I know I personally don't have kids, but I worked with a child many years ago, from like birth until 4 years old, and it was awesome. It was an awesome experience because I didn't have kids, so I got to see all these different stages of development. And what I noticed was when he was at about like 2 years old, when he was a toddler, when he could actually walk on his own, you could not keep his hands off of his genitals. Like that's all. Right. It was just like constantly, right? So I would imagine like they're developing, you said repeatedly, developmentally appropriate material. So what are the different stages of sexual awareness and sexual development? Because it seems like it starts like right out of the box. I mean, humans we're sexual creatures that we just are. Absolutely. From like day one. So could you explain that a little bit more? Developmentally appropriate education. What is that, and how do we find out what's appropriate when?
And again, you make a very great point. We are created as sexual beings. We all got here through some act of sex. And so I think it's so important to understand that and begin to see sexuality as a very natural part of who we are. And to your point, it starts as soon as a child actually comes out of the womb. And it even begins with when a mother or father is changing a baby's diaper. They can read they do facial recognition, right? And so if you're changing a child's diaper, your baby's diaper, and you're looking at their genitals with utter disgust, that leaves an imprint, actually. Studies show that leaves an imprint, actually, on the baby's brain in terms of how to respond and shaming when it comes to their genitalia. So
wait. I'm sorry to interrupt you, but I want to pause you there, because what you said is just so profound. So babies have facial recognition, and so if you're looking at your baby changing your baby's diaper, and you look at his or her genitals and you show disgust on your face, and they read that, it will imprint them with shame. It will imprint their brain with shame. Is that true?
Yes,
that is
what I'm
phenomenal. Saying. That is amazing.
Yes, and so from that date, those moments on, we are sending sexual cues, so to speak, to our children in terms of how to even respond to their own body. So if we have a look of disgust on their face, they're going to begin to think like, oh, that. And along with the terminology that we're using down there, with that look on the face, it's sending a message to the child that that's a nasty area, that's dirty, that's nasty, that's something that I shouldn't touch, it's something that I shouldn't look at. And it goes on, especially like you were saying, if you catch or you walk in on a young boy masturbating, it's natural. Sexuality is a basic urge, just like eating, just like fear. you know? And so it's a basic urge that's imprinted in our brainstem, which is the earliest part of the brain that's developed, right? And so it's very natural. And so when a young baby is, masturbating at a early age, your response to that child teaches them, again, shame, disgust, or it may teach them, that it's a very healthy and a very natural behavior, right? And so we're teaching them really as we are raising them without even having a conversation, right? So it's going to be so important that we are aware of our own sexual challenges. Again, like you said in the very beginning, how do we experience sexuality? We have to be able to experience it in a healthy way in order to teach it in a healthy way, whether it's through our verbal actions, our verbal words, or our nonverbal cues, right? And so as the child gets older, you continue to talk to them. Do you know what you're doing? Well, where did you learn that from? Where did you hear that? And then you can kind of gauge how the conversation should proceed and what accurate information you need to give them, again, at a very developmentally appropriate, manner. You'd be surprised. These young kids, I used to do puberty education in the school system. At fourth grade, they're asking about things that we could never have known when we were that age to ask about. They're asking about, sexual reassignment surgery. So at that age, they're ready to hear some information. So you can't just, push it aside because they're going to find out. And it's not going to be the accurate information because their little friends most of the times don't know anything either. And so it's going to be so important that as a parent, if you don't know the information, you find someone who can talk to them. And you be very open and you be very honest. Answer the questions. Don't just say, you shouldn't have sex. Well, why shouldn't you have sex? Well, you shouldn't have sex because of X, Y, and Z. And even if you're saying be abstinent, well, why should I be abstinent? Or how am I supposed to be abstinent? Because that's the message that a lot of kids get, rightfully so, growing up. But what does that mean? What does that look like? How do I deal with that in the face of my natural urges that I was born with, in addition to the societal peer pressure and the messages that I'm getting, right? So you have to be able to talk about sex from a comprehensive standpoint, not just from a don't do it standpoint, And when I say comprehensive, we all understand in most cases, the physical ramifications and implications of sexuality, STDs or sexually transmitted, infections or STIs rather, and pregnancy. But what about the emotional implications? What about the social, the legal, the economical, the spiritual, the energetical, the chemical? What about all these other dimensions of sexuality that impact us on a daily basis that we don't talk about? So we need to really, when I say comprehensive sexuality, I'm talking about thinking beyond physical and talking about how sexuality impacts our life across the spectrum, no matter what age we are,
Yes,
and
beautiful.
so those.
Yeah, and I was just going to interject there because everything you're saying, what's coming up for me is the point of all this is like your kids are going to find out about sex, period. Like we don't live in an age where you can just stick your head in the sand and pretend it doesn't exist. And if you're not teaching them, believe that somebody else is. And unfortunately, most of the information that's out there regarding sex is incorrect. I mean, I'm a sex educator, so I live in a sex educator bubble. So I see all this amazing, wonderful information. But for most people who aren't, haven't dedicated their lives to this work, they don't know. I mean, I meet men and women every day that have no idea that 90% of the clitoris is internal. Like I just took a course over the last few weekends with a bunch of college students who had no idea. They're like doctors and, therapists and they're, whatever. They're studying to be MDs and nobody knew that 90% of the clitoris was internal because that just isn't information that's readily available to people.
Absolutely. And to your point, what a lot of people don't realize is that unless you have a specialty in human sexuality, even if you are a physician, you do not get all the information that like a sex educator such as yourself or a clinical sexologist or somebody who specializes in sex therapy and human sexuality, we get way more in-depth information than even your physician may get. So it's so important that not only do you talk to your physician, but you also talk to someone who's a sex educator, counselor, or therapist to help bring in that comprehensive perspective. And again, it's so important to have these conversations and not be afraid to have the conversations because at the end of the day, if you make the wrong choice, sex can kill you. Although it's great, the orgasm is fantastic, it's not worth your life, right? And so that's why it's so important to get the accurate information because there's so many myths out there. There's so many misunderstandings when it comes to sexuality. Like for me, sex is like one of those things. Everybody thinks they're good at it. They think it, and everybody does it, but nobody wants to talk about it because there's this underlying stigma stigma and fear that's associated with sexuality. And we have to begin, those of us who are in this field, have to really begin to take charge and say, you know what, no, this is the messages around sexuality that we want to see in the media. Because what we're seeing on TV and definitely in pornography sends you a totally unrealistic expectation of what sexuality should be and what sexual pleasure should be. And if we are modeling our sex lives and even our relationships after the things that we're seeing on TV, we're definitely failing ourselves and cutting ourselves short. So that's why it's so important that we begin to have these conversations, because to your point, adults don't even know the basic function of the reproductive system or their anatomy and the physiology of the reproductive system. And if you don't know that, how can you have an A, informed conversation, and B, how can you provide yourself with the most sexual pleasure, and C, how can you keep yourself safer? So that's why it's so important that we talk about sexuality.
As adults,
and sexual health.
Absolutely. As adults amongst ourselves and then to our children. And the thing about pornography, I just wanted to say something because this memory was stimulated. So for the first time I ever saw porn, I think I was like 14 or 15, and I hadn't had sex. And I was so disgusted that my friends had to counsel me, like, okay, Davy, sex is not really like what you just saw. Because I was like, I'm never doing it. I am never doing it. Like what I saw, I was like, I will never do that. That was the most horrible thing I've ever seen. My friends were like, it's not like that. You know, it's really, trust me, give it a chance. But I was so horrified by what I saw that I wanted to like be a virgin forever. That I was going to be a virgin forever and have unicorns. That was my choice. Luckily, I changed my mind down the road. But so the other thing that comes up when we're talking about sex and kids and teenagers, this is the thing that people say. Well, if we talk to our kids about sex, then they're going to want to go run out and have it, which I don't personally think is a bad idea, but I get that a lot of people do. So does talking about sexuality with your teenagers give them permission to go out and start having sex, in your opinion?
In my opinion, absolutely not. I think talking to your child about sex gives them the information, the education, the tools and skills that they need in order to keep themselves safe and make informed decisions when they are ready to have sex. I think I also look at it like this. Does buying automobile insurance mean that you're going to get into an accident? Absolutely not. It just means that in case you do, you are protected. You have the information and the skills and the tools you need in order to get your car fixed, right? And so that's how I think about providing sex education to kids. It's just information, it's education, so that when they are ready, that they can make an informed decision
that
to keep themselves
awesome.
safer.
That is an awesome way to think of it. So sex education is like insurance.
Absolutely.
I love it. And I love that taking it a step further. It's insurance, meaning ensuring that they're not going to be ignorant and, have bad things happen.
Absolutely.
Yes, I love that concept. So we kind of touched upon what age you should start talking to your children about sex, which is kind of like from the beginning because they're learning about it, whether you're aware of it or not. Well, say when it comes to, like teenagers, should we start around 11 or 12? Because I guess they're developing earlier and earlier these days from what I hear. When you sit down and actually have the birds and the bees and, this is use condoms, or do you want birth control? What age, around what age do you recommend for that?
Again, it's very developmentally appropriate. So around the time, especially if, let's say, for example, that you have a toddler, about age 5, and the mother becomes pregnant, definitely at that time, it's appropriate to begin having the conversation in a way that the child can understand it, right? Mommy, there's a baby growing inside of mommy's belly. This is what happens, and so on and so forth, so that the child can understand that the baby didn't just come from a stork, or the mom just didn't go somewhere and get the baby. Just having a conversation about the process and what happens. I'm not saying you have to be graphic, like mommy and daddy had intercourse and, this is what happened and it felt good. No, but you explain it in a very developmentally appropriate way, because kids walk in and they see parents having sex, or they walk in and they see mommy or daddy naked because they don't knock on the bathroom door. So what do you do at that point? you have a conversation because you don't want to traumatize the child. You don't want to, oh my God, go into a whole raging fit. You want to explain to the child what's going on. This is mommy's body. You're a young woman. As you continue to grow, you will develop breasts like mommy, but that won't happen until you're much older, around the age of blah, blah, blah. You have the conversation, but then you don't want to give them too much information where you traumatize them that way as well. So you do it, again, in a very developmentally appropriate way. Around the age of 9, you want to start to have the conversation about puberty and hygiene because that's important. You want to talk to them about how their body's going to change because the hormones that's, the hormones that's being, emitted in their body during puberty. And these hormones are going to start to cause changes in the body. And as a result, you'll begin to develop breasts. You'll begin to start your menstrual cycle. And it's so important for young girls to understand that even before they see their first drop of blood, for their menstrual cycle, that they're ovulating. And once a girl starts ovulating, no matter how old she is, whether she saw blood or not, she can get pregnant because that's what you need in order for a girl to have a baby. It's that ovulation, so she can get pregnant if she's having sex. So you have to start having those conversations. And like you said earlier, it's happening much younger, than it did in the past, like around 9 or 10. And then you start to have the conversation when she gets into middle school, or, upper elementary school, when they start to develop those emotions towards young men and young women, towards each other. You want to have those conversations about what those feelings are, how they can get those, those feelings can lead to sexual feelings, which can lead to X, Y, and Z. You want to have that conversation. And then you want to bring in, as they get older, maybe middle school, late middle school, early high school, you want to start to have a conversation about contraceptives because by that time, actually, if they're having sex education in school, they would have covered all of that, around middle school anyway. And so you want to be reinforcing the messages at home that you want for your child to follow, because everybody's home is different. Like one family may not care that their child is sexually active in high school, while another family may care. And so you need to be starting to reinforce those sexual morals and values in your home.
Yes, and that's a great point. And I think one of the issues is that a lot of parents, because we as adults are so uncomfortable with our own sexuality, that we kind of just want to let the school take over, right? Which can be extremely dangerous. And so this is a problem for me, theoretically, because again, I don't have children of my own, but I am part of this culture in which children are being raised, so it affects me too. So one of the issues for me is when we deal with things like abstinence-only education. And like the climate of fear and ignorance and shame that perpetuates. So if I, as a parent, if my attitude is, oh, well, I'm just going to let my school teach my kids. But the thing is like, A, your school isn't teaching your kids, and B, what they're teaching them is like freaking pathetic in regards to sex education. So, it's kind of like a catch-22. Like, what do we do in this situation?
I think that it has to be a beautiful balance. In other words, I think that first, before we get to the beautiful balance, I think there needs to be a re-education of society in general in terms of what healthy sexuality is, what comprehensive sexuality is. Because studies show that abstinence-only programming does not work. And if you want to, a recent case in the news or in the media, there was a high school in Texas where they only provided abstinence-only education, and there was a chlamydia outbreak, either chlamydia or gonorrhea outbreak within that school system. So go figure, abstinence education is not working. But I think, again, because sexuality is one of those things that's also attached to morality and values, you have so many people who value sexuality but then don't value sexuality. So you have that conflict there in terms of what type of education the school system should be providing. But however, when you look at true comprehensive sexuality education, it incorporates abstinence-only education. And again, I go back to my point. When we say abstinence-only, what does that mean anyway? Be abstinent. Okay, but how do I, practice abstinence in a very real world when I have very real emotions and very real feelings that are attached to sexuality? Because, again, that's how we were created. It's our basic urge. And so, again, I think making sure that we are properly, informing ourselves and educating ourselves about what true comprehensive sexuality is as a society and creating sex-positive messages. B, making sure that those who are responsible for providing sex education are completely and totally immersed in the process, meaning that they are aware of their own biases. They have bracketed their biases, meaning that they have put them aside, and they're able to accurately provide this information with comprehensive sexuality information and education in a very non-judgmental, safe way, so that our young people and even our adults are willing to learn the information, and not just the education. You got to take it a step further and provide some skills-based learning in that curriculum as well. And when I say skills-based, this is what I mean. So we can say all day, condoms, if used consistently and correctly with every sexual, sexual intercourse every time, will prevent HIV and protect you against pregnancy and all those sorts of things. But if you don't tell me the steps to put on a condom, where to go get the condom, how to properly store the condom, then you've done me a disservice. So you need to incorporate that skills-based piece in there, as well as how do I even negotiate safer sex with my partner? You have to have that conversation as well, too. Or if I don't want to have sex, how do I negotiate that? Like, how do I facilitate that process by talking to my partner and saying, this is not an option that I choose to have right now, but let's do this instead. How do you have that conversation? What does that look like? So all of those things go into comprehensive sexuality education. Or even if I've had sex before, how do I, talk to my partner and not do it again? So all of those things go into comprehensive sexuality education. And we have to stop letting the gym teacher, the science teacher, the health education teacher teach sexuality, and any other teacher teach sexuality because it's only a half of a semester that we want to cram into the curriculum anyway. So we need to make sure that we put a healthy value on healthy sexuality, get people trained, get a true comprehensive sexuality education curriculum that's sex positive, that teaches not only education, but also provides skills for the participants or the people we're teaching it to.
I find it interesting when we talk, and great point about like the gym teacher and because I remember, those poor gym teachers. I mean, seriously, we're in 7th grade and like they're just like so uncomfortable and they've got to do this thing, and I have a lot of empathy for them now. So exactly correct. These are not the people that should be teaching our children about sex. Your gym teacher should not be teaching your kid about how to have safe sex, number one. But number two, what I find it really interesting in all these conversations about sex education is the fact that it seems as though we're terrified to talk about pleasure. We're willing to talk about disease. We're willing to talk about pregnancy. We're willing to talk about how to not have sex. But what about the reasons to have sex? Why aren't we talking about that? Why aren't we talking about how much pleasure we can give and receive? How sex is a union, a sacred union between two people. And it can be fun, and it can be joyful, and it can be this amazing, like, life-changing event. Even if you're 14 years old, it can be amazing. Like, some of the best sex I ever had was when I was 17 with this amazing partner, because we just played. We had so much fun, and we just did it for hours. It was awesome. And it was one of my most formative sexual experiences that I carried with me for the rest of my life, because it was so positive, because there was so much pleasure in it. And there's so much trauma. We're so traumatized in regards to sex. Porn is traumatizing, abstinence only education is traumatizing. So I even hearing, even in this discussion and talking about educating our children about sex, what I'm noticing is being left out of the conversation is the pleasure and the reasons why to have sex. There's plenty of reasons to not have sex. Let's talk about why we should have sex. So when talking to children, how do we explain to our teenagers things about, why would you want to have sex?
Well, I think just some of the very reasons that you said are the very ways that you said, identifying, like you said, what's pleasurable, about sex, the emotional aspect of sex, the spiritual aspect of sexuality, like how all of those things intertwine and to make a great sexual experience, the intimacy that it builds between partners. And to your point, you can't have a true comprehensive conversation about sexuality without incorporating those things. But again, the reason that we're not having those conversations is the moralistic and the values laden, the heavy value laden beliefs that are attached to sexuality. Because in this country, sexuality is not looked upon as something that's very natural, something that's very satisfying, something that can bring pleasure, when experienced. It's looked upon as something that you should not do, something that's, very, it's the way it's framed, it's very, like you said, it's in a very negative light, And so, again, it goes back to needing a re-education of what sexuality really is and all the aspects and all the beautiful colors of sexuality but before we can even begin to have a conversation on pleasure, we have to really just be re-educated and really look at it.
Yes, thank you for saying that. I love that you just said re-educated. And I would say as a culture, as a society, and and going and talking about barriers, so it sounds like what you're saying, the biggest barrier to comprehensive sex education is our own relationship to sex as a society.
Absolutely. It's so interesting because I think it may have been, oh my gosh, I want to say over 5 years ago, there was a curriculum that actually came out in the UK, and it was 14th, and it was called Sex Can Be Fun, something around that title. And it was such a huge uproar when people in this country found out about it because, again, it was, oh, my gosh, how dare you teach kids that sex could be fun, that masturbation is, my goodness, heaven forbid, a normal activity that one will experience in their lifetime at some point, and it caused such a big uproar. So I laugh to myself right now as we have this conversation because I can only imagine in this society what that would do if we had a curriculum that was implemented in the school system about the pleasure aspect of sexuality. And again, this was for teenagers. So we couldn't even probably implement something of that sort in a college curriculum without it causing much of an uproar. So, yeah, I think, in order, like you said, to have this true comprehensive education, we have to we definitely have to incorporate the aspect of pleasure.
Yeah, so I think you're exactly correct. Unfortunately, in this culture, I mean, my God, it's the idea of talking about pleasure to teenagers would probably, we probably get arrested. So we're for the, but it needs to change. The fact is that what we've been doing up to this point has been detrimental and degenerative and not healthy, and that's just a fact. So we're having this conversation on air so that we can, because we're changing, because things are changing, because people are waking up. So for the parents out there who are afraid of talking to their children about sex, but want their children to have a healthy relationship to sex, because I haven't met any parent, and granted, again, I'm in the little sex educator bubble that I live in, but I have yet to meet two adults who say, I want my kids to hate sex. I want them to have a really fucked up sexual relationship for the rest of their life and with every partner that it just sucks. I've not heard a parent say that. And yet, by saying nothing, we're kind of ensuring that that's the case. So for those parents listening this evening, what would be their first step? Say they've got a 13-year-old, 14-year-old, 15-year-old kid at home. They're not really comfortable with their own sexuality. They don't really know that they want to talk about pleasure with their kids. Where can they point? Where can they go to get information? Where can they learn, and where can they figure out where to point their kids to learn information that's going to be healthy for them and that also includes pleasure?
I think that first and foremost, like you said, they're going to have to get comfortable with themselves. And so that may mean doing a little bit of work and facing their issues or their challenges, their concerns around sexuality. What does that mean for them? Because, again, it starts with the parent. If the parent has a very unhealthy attitude regarding sexuality, then it's going to be transferred to the child. Or vice versa, if they have a very healthy, open attitude about sexuality, the child's going to tend to have a more open, healthy attitude about sexuality. So, again, I think it starts within first. Unpacking all of that stuff and really figuring it out and putting it in its appropriate places and developing that healthy sexual attitude around sexuality. So that may mean going to see a sex counselor or a sex therapist or a sex educator. And I want to just put it out there because I have to. Everybody that wears the title of sex educator, sexologist, or sex therapist, does not necessarily have the accurate information, does not necessarily have the credentials, or does not necessarily know how to properly educate someone. And that's a big problem too within this field that you may not have experienced it, but I have. We have people out there that are giving misinformation because they don't have the accurate training or the education qualifications to be a sex educator. And don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that it needs to be formalized education, not that you have to go to college and all of these things, but you need to know what you're talking about when you're providing sex education information to people, because if you don't, you can kill somebody. You can give them the wrong information. And so with that being said, that parent is going to have to do their due diligence to make sure that they're working with someone who's reputable, who's qualified and knowledgeable to be giving out this type of information. How can you find someone? If you search sex educators, sex counselors, sex therapists on the internet, you're going to pull up a whole bunch of stuff. So I would suggest maybe starting from a Planned Parenthood standpoint, or maybe going to ASEC, which is the American Association of Sex Educators, Counselors, and Therapists, and they have on their website a section where you can locate a ASEC professional in your area, okay? And that's a great starting point. Or you can try starting with a mental health clinician and explaining to them what your needs are and seeing if they have a referral network where they can refer you to a sex therapist or someone who is used to working with someone who has sexual challenges or concerns. Also, you can do the same for your child. If you're not comfortable, you're not ready to deal with your stuff, don't put it onto your child. Don't unpack it on them. That's not fair. You can also work with a Planned Parenthood. You can work with a professional who's able to provide your child with the accurate information. Don't send them to the internet, because the internet is full of so much stuff. I was having this conversation with my husband the other day. Technology is fantastic. The internet is great, but we're getting to a point where we can't decipher what's real or not. But people think just because it's on the internet, it's fact. But I can cut up and splice a video to make it look the way that I want it to look, right? And that's so dangerous. So that's why it's so important that if you do an internet search, make sure you search and you search and you search and you research what you search to verify the validity of what it is that you're pulling up. In terms of making sure that you're getting a person who's going to talk to you about sexuality in a very appropriate, non-judgmental, safe manner, and they're going to talk about everything from A to Z, including pleasure, including diseases, including, the biochemistry aspect of sexuality, including the emotional aspect of sexuality, the spiritual aspect of sexuality, the energetical aspect of sexuality, and the social, emotional, the legal aspect of sexuality. You want someone who's qualified to do this, and I just extend myself, of course, as a resource. You can always contact me, and I'll be willing to make sure, if you're not comfortable or you're not wanting to use me, as a therapist, then I would make sure that I would find someone who in your area, or try to refer you to someone, because my mission in life is to make sure people are getting accurate information, knowledge, and skills that can save their life and provide them with some pleasure.
Mm-hmm. And you make a really wonderful point, because the field of sex education has become so vast and so diverse, and there's so many different angles. I mean, I come directly from a Tantra angle, and so that's my entire focus is on that, and using sex as medicine and sexual healing. So, I have some people ask me about natural birth control. I mean, that's not my specialty at all. And what I use as a 40-year-old woman is going to be different than what a 20-year-old woman needs and uses and all that sort of thing. So I actually refer people. Like, I'm pretty clear about, I just don't know certain shit. So I'll send you to somebody who does, because that's not my realm of expertise, and I don't want to tell you something, that's going to get somebody in trouble here. So absolutely. So keeping in mind when looking for sex educators, and especially if you're talking about kids, and you do want to get somebody who can incorporate, who's educated in some of the more practical things, like, putting on and taking off condoms and that sort of thing, and all the aspects that goes into safe sex for teenagers, as well as perhaps some education, some skill. And I would say, like practical skills for pleasure and information. I mean, one of the biggest things talking with both women and men is that whole internal network of erectile tissue for women. That makes all the difference.
Absolutely.
That has a huge impact on your pleasure. And if you don't know what's under the hood, you're not going to be able to drive your car.
And that's so. I always say that if you don't know your body parts and and how they function and how they work together, how can you provide yourself with optimal pleasure? And I use the analogy of my cell phone. If I would have read the directions, I might know how my cell phone works
Exactly.
a little bit better. And so, it's the same thing with our bodies. When you know your body and how it works, the different types of orgasms beyond a clitoral orgasm, then you can experience more pleasure because, in fact, your body may be orgasming, but you just don't know the type of orgasm. So you don't think that you're experiencing pleasure. So it's so important to provide yourself or to get out there and learn this information, so that you can experience more pleasure.
Absolutely, because pleasure essentially is our birthright. And in our culture,
Absolutely.
It's very normal for people want to have pleasurable eating experiences. I don't know anybody who's like, yes, I want poop, poop for dinner. Yes, poop.
Right.
I want it to smell bad and taste bad. There's nobody that I know who says that. It's ridiculous, right? So this idea of, we're very committed to our pleasure when it comes to food, when it comes to quality of life, when it comes to so many other things. So why not be as embracing and committed to our pleasure when it comes to our sexuality? And the only reason why not is because we are cultured that, that's wrong and shameful. And so, again, that's why we're having this conversation, is to shift that consciousness. And it sounds like, again, that's the biggest thing that needs to happen, is the shift in consciousness. We need to heal as a culture. We need to heal our relationship to our we need to heal our sexual relationship as a culture. Let's do it.
Absolutely. Yes, I agree. And because of that and everything we've talked about in this conversation, I have started a movement, which is How Dare I Not? I Save Lives. And it's to do exactly what we're talking about. Basically a movement that's created to empower individuals with conversations around, basically, let's start this over. It's basically to normalize sex-positive conversations, to remove the stigma and to remove the taboo around healthy sexuality. And so basically it's just really, how dare we not talk about sexuality, because it can save your life. And within that conversation, we're talking about pleasure. We're talking about, again, the different dimensions of sexuality and how sexuality impacts us in our everyday life. And the movement got started because I do a lot of writing. I write a lot of articles. And I usually don't read the feedback on my articles because sometimes some of it's just really over the top. And it's like, really, you didn't have anything else to do, but you just want to say something back. So occasionally I will read them. And I got frustrated off of a couple of different articles. And I got to thinking, because some of the comments was like, oh, my gosh, I can't believe you're writing an article about truffle butter. Oh, my gosh, why would people want to have anal sex? Oh, my gosh, people are doing this. Oh, my gosh. And I'm like, well, dude, how dare I not talk about this information? Because it can save your life. Do you even know what truffle butter is? Do you know what type of risk you're putting yourself in? If you are engaging in these types of behaviors, and not only you, but your young people are singing these songs and they're engaged in these type of behavior. They don't know what type of risk they're putting themselves at. While they may be getting some pleasure, there's still some risk attached to that pleasure. Whether it's a physical risk or
So
okay,
I'm sorry to cut you off, but I know what truffle butter means, but I didn't, and I have to say that the song does not give any indication whatsoever about what it actually is. So I would bet that pretty much everybody listening to the show right now has no freaking idea what truffle butter is. Can you please let us know exactly in detail what truffle butter actually is?
Yes, and I'm gonna try to figure out. You know what? No, I'm not. I was gonna say I'm gonna try to figure out a way to say it without grossing the audience out.
No, just gross us out.
No, I'm not. I'm gonna say it because you need to be. You need to know what it is, and you might need to be grossed out by it. So basically, truffle butter is when an individual is engaging in anal sex, meaning penis to anus sex, right? And then there may be some fecal matter that's left inside of the anus, and it gets onto the penis. And then the male will go from the rear entry anal sex to vaginal sex, penile vaginal sex. And when a woman has an orgasm, or even before she has an orgasm, there may be some vaginal lubrication or vaginal fluid inside of the vagina. And the mix between the vaginal fluid and the fecal matter that has come out of the anus during sex creates what's a tan, creamy color, and that substance that it creates, that tan, creamy substance that it creates is called the truffle butter.
So, okay, so it's from poop on the penis, from having anal sex,
Yes.
and he doesn't wipe it off. So this is why we need comprehensive sex education. You would never go from the booty to the vagina without wiping it off first, okay? But then,
Absolutely not.
so then he's got poop on his dick, basically, and he puts it in the vagina, and then with all the creaminess and whatever, it creates this brown stuff. So I had somebody else tell me it was like the pus from the infection that's created from having, anal bacteria in the vagina, because you're gonna get an infection, right?
Yes, you're definitely going to get an infection.
Whether there's poop or not, I've had friends that were like, "Oh, I didn't know that. No wonder I got a yeast infection." Like, yes, you cannot put. That's why we wipe front to back from we're 3 years old, front to back. You do not ever wipe back to front.
Absolutely. It's the same concept, but unfortunately, some women, young girls, don't even get that conversation. Again, this is part of that hygiene conversation that you have as soon as you're potty training. Wipe from front to back. So again, there's the education in a very developmentally appropriate way.
Yes, exactly. So thank you for decoding truffle butter. So I don't know, like Nicki Minaj, Drake, I got a lot of respect for them, but what the F were they thinking with that song? Oh my God.
Absolutely.
Then we're all running around in our convertibles banging out truffle butter. Yeah, truffle butter. Like, yuck.
Yeah, and not even, yes.
Yeah. So very sorry to interrupt you there. So exactly, that exactly proves your point. How dare we not talk about truffle butter on the air? How dare we not?
Right. How dare we not have these conversations, no matter how disgusting some may think it is, no matter how empowering some may think it is, no matter what someone thinks. How dare we not have these conversations about sexuality? Because not knowing can get you into a lot of trouble.
Yes, and cause really
so
bad
it's so
infections.
important. I'm sorry?
I said, and cause really bad infections.
Absolutely right. And even, other different things associated with, sexuality or sexual decisions that we're making. So we have to normalize conversations about sexuality. We have to remove the stigma. We have to remove the taboo and begin to re-educate. Here we go again. Begin to re-educate society about what true comprehensive sexuality is, so that we can begin having these conversations, saving lives and increasing pleasure.
Beautiful. So how can people join this campaign? Because it's amazing. I mean, exactly. How dare we not? How dare we not, as a culture, be talking about this and informing each other and our children about how to stay healthy and happy? How dare we not?
Yes. People can log onto the website. It's actually www.howdareinot.com. You can learn all about the movement. You can learn about me. You can subscribe to the website or the blog that's on the website. You can download the logo, because there's a logo on the website for the campaign. And and if you go under the movement tab, it tells you all about what the logo represents, because there's a story behind the logo. But then also on the homepage of the website, you'll see scrolling at the top, pictures of people who've already joined the movement. They've taken a picture with the logo, whether they printed the logo out, whether they held the logo up on their tablet, their cell phone, or they stood next to the computer with the logo in the background. People have gotten really creative in terms of using this logo and sending me a picture. And I put all the pictures on the website. I put them on Facebook. And anytime I post, and I ask people who share my post to always use the hashtag, how dare I not, hashtag I save lives, to show that you're in support of this movement, to show that you are standing in agreement that we need to have conversations about healthy sexuality, because you understand the importance of it, because you took time to look, to either have a conversation with me personally, you took time to read something that I'm writing, you took time to listen to the video that I put out about the movement, or whether you just actually went to the website and you researched the concept and the thought and the idea behind the movement. But again, the website is www.howdareinot.com.
So you've started a revolution. You've started a sexual revolution.
Yes, I have. Yes, because we have to talk about sex. This is my mission and my purpose in life, and if one person one person turns to two, two turns to three, and so on and so forth until we have, my goal is to eventually have 1 million people proudly displaying this hashtag, how dare I not, hashtag I save lives, 1 million people scrolling on this website showing that it's important that we talk about sexuality in a very true, real, honest, and comprehensive way. It's the only way.
You are just freaking amazing.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Yes, and I want. Do I have a typo here in my bio? I have a Dr. Tamara Griffin. Is there a green in your name at all, or is that just a completely effed up typo that I have made a fool out of myself by saying all freaking show?
That's okay. It might be it's a typo because the last name is actually Griffin. But you know what? It's interesting because I heard you say Green, but then you did say Griffin, and then you went back to Green. But it's okay. It's actually Dr. Tamara Griffin. Yeah.
Okay. I didn't know if it was like Green Griffin, but for some reason on my paper it says Green, and I'm like, and then there says Griffin down. I'm like, so I apologize to you and the audience. It is Dr. Tamara Griffin, so please forgive my horrible faux pas of calling my guest the wrong name. Griffin.
That's all right.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for joining us this evening. It has been so wonderful having you, and just so enriching. And you answer the question I get from so many people, which is, how do I talk to my children about sex? And again, it starts with us, and it starts in the home. And please, let's not leave it in the hands of our public schools. I mean, unless you see that they've been trained by Dr. Tamara. In that case, definitely leave it in the hands of your school.
I appreciate that. Thank you so much.
You're so welcome. So you all have a fabulous, fabulous weekend. And until next week, much love and many blessings. Peace out.